Just as Iran and Israel are exchanging kinetic blows, multiple reports indicate that Tehran may have conducted an underground nuclear test for the first time. On October 5th, the US Geological Survey detected unusual seismic activity with a magnitude of 4.5 at a depth of 10 kilometers. It happened in a remote area southeast of the capital, Tehran. At around the same time, numerous Iranian state-run media outlets, including military channels, reported that an extraordinary announcement regarding Iran's nuclear program would soon be made. The earthquake, the rhetoric, the location, and the timing all add a layer of complexity to an already combustible region. So, did Iran covertly detonate a nuclear bomb to send a cryptic message to the Israelis? We have no way of knowing, and open source intel can only get us so far. What we do know is that the Iranian plateau is prone to earthquakes, and the 10-kilometer deep epicenter could be just the base value that seismographic readers can interpret. Smoke without fire. That's what this incident is. Even so, in the grand scheme of things, it looks increasingly likely that Iran's leadership will get its hands on nuclear weapons. If not this year, then in the years following. The real question now is, what would happen the day after? While the Israeli-Iranian conflict seems far away, its ripple effects are global. Just look at how oil prices reacted to just the potential threat to Iran's supply. About a third of the world's maritime oil trade goes through the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran were to close that strait, prices would skyrocket. So every advanced economy is at risk. That's why, just a few months ago, Bank of America reported over 80% of young, wealthy investors are looking to diversify into fine art as part of their overall portfolio strategy. Masterworks, the sponsor of this video, is making those same assets investable. Their art investing platform has distributed back a total of over $60 million in investor proceeds across 23 exits. Right now, low prices in the art market present a unique opportunity for new investors to enter the market. Just recently, Masterworks posted a profitable return from selling a Basquiat painting for $8 million. Masterworks handles all the legwork: authentication, acquisition, and storage. All you do is invest in a piece of artwork you like. Once the painting is sold, potential net proceeds from the sale get distributed to the investors. As a Caspian Report viewer, you can start investing right away by using the QR code on the screen or by going to masterworks.art/Caspian. It's important to note that past sales and previous offerings are not indicative of future results. Investing always involves risk. For disclosures, go to masterworks.com/CD. Iran has been at odds with the West for nearly half a century. The Americans backed Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War, labeled Iran as part of the infamous Axis of Evil, collaborated with Israel in a cyber attack on Iranian enrichment infrastructure, and eliminated the head of Iran's foreign intelligence operations. Suffice it to say, things have been less than cordial. In response to these activities, Iran developed a constellation of proxy forces in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Gaza. By arming, funding, and training localized militias, Iran established a deterrence. It could cause mayhem on Israeli and American interests without needing to resort to conventional means. However, the deaths of proxy leaders such as Ismail Haniyeh and Hassan Nasrallah have turned Iran's jewels into relics. Tehran's asymmetric and proxy capacity have been taken aback, so much so that the Iranians may now be sprinting to establish a more conventional form of deterrence: nuclear weapons. In recent months, Iranian officials have been insinuating openly the need for nuclear weapons, while the government has been steadily expanding the number and sophistication of its centrifuges for purifying uranium. In February 2023, the International Atomic Energy Agency reported that Iran accelerated its production of enriched uranium to 84% purity, which is close to the 90% needed for a nuclear bomb. In the same month, top US officials testified to Congress that Iran could produce enough fissile materials to manufacture a nuclear bomb within 12 days. Well, it has been well over a year since that assessment, and amid ongoing hostilities in the Middle East, concerns over Iran's nuclear program have intensified. American and Israeli lawmakers have consistently vowed to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear bomb, promising to strike Iranian nuclear sites if the nation nears a critical point of capability. Tensions nearly escalated into open conflict in 2011, but the Americans withdrew at the final moment. Today, however, such airstrikes are no longer feasible. Iran's facilities are too deeply buried, and nuclear know-how has proliferated too widely. At best, airstrikes and assassinations could set Iran back by a few months until the infrastructure is rebuilt. We are now too far in the process to have second thoughts. Suppose Iran built a stockpile of nuclear bombs, including warheads and delivery systems. How would it conduct itself? Well, that would largely depend on its nuclear doctrine. It could do as India does and set up a centralized body to maintain close control over its nuclear arsenal and only use it in a matter of life or death. Alternatively, it could do as Pakistan does and disperse and delegate tactical nuclear weapons to commanders in the field designed to ward off conventional military threats. What posture Tehran adopts will determine its foreign policy. In most cases, nuclear weapons make the top brass more belligerent. This is precisely what happened with Pakistan when it acquired nuclear weapons. Just 1 year after the nuclear breakout, Pakistani-backed paramilitary groups encroached on Indian-controlled territory. Similarly, with North Korea, 4 years after its first successful nuclear test, it attacked and torpedoed a South Korean ship. A nuclear-armed Iran would likewise act more brazenly and recklessly. For instance, in the Persian Gulf, Tehran could apply more pressure on its rivals to achieve strategic goals. This waterway hosts a dozen US military facilities, including air bases in Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. There are also naval bases in Bahrain and the UAE, plus a few forward bases in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. These facilities are brimming with modern, long-range weapons. They place Iran's demographic, military, and logistical sites under American fire control. On the flip side, they also ensure the flow of crude oil and natural gas to global markets, which pass through the Strait of Hormuz. In a sense, the US military bases confine Iranian power to its geography. Tehran, however, sees it as a containment belt, a leash it desperately wants to get rid of. A nuclear-armed Iran would want to do just that, while using the threat of nuclear escalation to deter military retaliation. For starters, it could twist the UAE's arm into surrendering 3 disputed islands: the Greater Tunb, the Lesser Tunb, and Abu Musa. These islands were initially occupied by Iran in 1971 during the time of the monarchy and the formation of the UAE. Today, both Tehran and Abu Dhabi claim the islands as their own, and for over 40 years, the dispute has been a sore point in relations. Should the UAE give in, Iran could use the islands to set up forward military facilities, including missile launch pads, which it could use to gain additional leverage. Moreover, taking the disputed islands could set a dangerous precedent. Iran's irredentist claim is based on historical context, arguing that the islands were part of the Persian Empire in the 6th century BC. Should Iran succeed, it could try turning back the clock in other places, which would render moot internationally recognized borders. Elsewhere in the region, a nuclear-armed brazen Iran would look to recruit and develop new proxy units, particularly Shia-based. The eastern coast of Saudi Arabia has a Shia majority population centering around the city of Qatif. Like in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, Iranian intelligence operations would look to probe Saudi territory and gather a new proxy force there. Doing so would permanently overturn the balance of power between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which has existed so far. Joining the nuclear club would also fundamentally reshape the way Tehran views itself. Iran already has an ideological mindset that legitimizes its interference in the affairs of others. A nuclear-armed Iran would amplify such ideological beliefs. Tehran would look to extract security, political, and economic concessions from all its neighbors. For instance, it would look to terminate the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. This initiative, backed by the United States and the European Union, envisions a transit corridor that begins in India and traverses the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and Greece before landing in Europe. The Gaza conflict has all but invalidated the corridor, and a nuclear Iran would want to abolish the route altogether. Another corridor Iran dislikes is the Zengezur corridor, which is part of the larger Middle Corridor. This one goes from Central Asia across the Caspian Sea and then into Turkey. The Zengezur corridor offers a slightly shorter route by connecting Azerbaijan's mainland with its western exclave by going through Armenian territory. The terms and conditions are still being negotiated between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Iran, however, opposes the corridor because it wants the route to go through its territory instead and thereby be part of the Chinese-European trade that will expand in the coming decades. As a result, Iran has come to blows with Azerbaijan, which happens to have deep-running military, economic, and political ties with both Israel and Turkey. Still more complicated, Azerbaijan is also part of the North-South corridor, which goes from Moscow to Baku, Tehran, and then Mumbai. A nuclear-armed Iran would look to renegotiate the terms for this corridor and the others in ways that it come out on top. Altogether, these are but a few battle spaces where the Iranians could try to use nuclear deterrence to compel powerhouses far and near to recognize its interests. Iran's rivalry with Israel stands on the precipice of fundamental change. In spite of the antagonizing rhetoric, Iran's leadership acknowledges Israel's conventional military superiority and nuclear edge. Back in April, when Israel attacked Iran's diplomatic mission in Syria and the Iranians responded by launching missiles and drones at Israel, Tehran deliberately downplayed the Israeli retaliatory response to avoid a broader conflict involving the United States. A nuclear-armed Iran would reshape this configuration. Since both the Israelis and Iranians would rely on their nuclear arsenals to shield them from conventional escalation, the only way to fight would be to take it out on bystanders. This dynamic is known as the stability-instability paradox, a behavioral thesis dating to the Cold War. It goes as follows: as the probability of nuclear conflict decreases, the probability of conventional war increases. And as the probability of nuclear conflict increases, the probability of conventional war decreases. In layman's terms, the low-intensity conflict between Iran and Israel would increasingly play out in the open since nuclear retaliation would deter large-scale conflict. So, a nuclear-armed Iran and a nuclear-armed Israel could coexist, but violently so. The deterrence granted by nukes would allow the Israelis and Iranians to redouble their armed struggle. What we're seeing in Lebanon and elsewhere could become the new normal. Moreover, a nuclear-armed Iran would augment proxy forces such as Hezbollah and Hamas. Much like the Soviet attempt to build missile facilities in Cuba, the Iranians could try to smuggle nuclear bombs into the hands of Hezbollah. Israeli intelligence will have deeply infiltrated Hezbollah to repel such a dirty bomb, but the threat would be there nonetheless. As a result, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and the Iraqi militias would likely behave more belligerently, knowing they have the backing of a nuclear-armed power. For Iran, meanwhile, the risks associated with supporting its proxies would drop as nuclear deterrence is established. Viewed in a larger context, the United States could learn to live with Iran possessing nuclear weapons. But many of the regional nations will see it differently. Some will look for ways to deter the Iranians by developing their own nuclear weapons. The Saudis have hinted more than once that they would push for a nuclear deterrent of their own if Iran got hold of a nuclear bomb. Turkey, Egypt, and the UAE are also likely to explore such options. So, the moment Iran goes nuclear, a nuclear arms race would become inevitable. The stability-instability paradox suggests that such an arms race would be essential to stabilize the wider region. Nuclear power is such a destructive element that even the most determined leaders respect it. That said, this is one of those social science experiments policymakers would rather steer clear of. If the recent earthquake does turn out to be a nuclear test, Tehran will need a few more months to develop an arsenal of a half dozen or more before detonating one on the surface. The Iranians will not want to fire one weapon in the open and then be out of ammunition. However, until that arsenal is in place, circumstances will get more dangerous. It will be like defusing a bomb with a blindfold on. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you approve of what we do, please leave a comment and mayhaps share the video. In any case, thank you for your time and Sawal.